hostmanship in the front and back office of our Geneva Museum. Just 5 years ago, I was approached by my colleague and staff member in public relations and communications, and she had been on a conference where she had heard a very interesting presentation about a special approach to visitors and all the other clients that you have coming through. This approach is called hostmanship. She also gave me this, and I have got it with me, this accompanying booklet. And I have to be honest and to confess that this booklet ended up on the big pile of specialist literature on my desk. That's getting a bit bigger and bigger month by month, even week by week. But I must also confess that I was really charmed by the handy format and by the cover. It fitted into my inside pocket. So a few weeks later, I took it with me without thinking when I was on my way to a conference myself, and I started reading it during my train journey. I got fascinated by the booklet, and in no time at all, I had read it from cover to cover. I was especially captivated by the very enlightening, practical approach of hostmanship, and by the fact that this was part of a wider but very hands-on philosophical context. And it's exactly this which makes hostmanship's methodology so unique and special. And here is where the hostmanship approach distinguishes itself clearly from the hundreds of other courses, trainings, and the like with regard to customer friendliness and customer-oriented communications, which often serve only the purposes of the business management of an organization. And by this I mean the development or training of all kinds of social communication skills in order to earn bigger profits. So mainly from the point of view of those providing a service and less from the point of view of those who receive the service, the customers, or in our case, the visitors. Now I'm going to explain to you very briefly, and without going into too much detail, what hostmanship consists of. Then I will give you a quick idea of how visitors are welcomed in our Geneva Museum. And lastly, I will talk about how in recent years we have integrated and implemented hostmanship in our contacts with visitors. Now, hostmanship is a combination of the English terms hospitality and craftsmanship. And it's not just a technique or a management tool, but it also offers a powerful philosophy and methodology for developing people-oriented service. It's a philosophy based on the art of making people feel that they are welcome. A service from the customer's point of view. And the core idea of hostmanship is to make yourself, each other, and others feel welcome. And this way, you learn to treat others not how you would like to be treated yourself, but how the other person would really like to be treated. And I guess that's not a trivial difference in meaning. Now, the philosophy was created and conceived in Sweden around the year 2000 by Jan Gunnarsson, you see his picture here, who has over 25 years of experience in entrepreneurship and communication in the commercial and public services. I'll be happy to let him and a few others explain in their own words what exactly hostmanship is all about.
Throughout my life, I've seen the importance of people feeling welcome. I've seen it in organizations, and I've seen it in societies, and I can see it in the world. It's so crucial that we create environments where people feel included, welcomed, wished for, and expected. When I see what really makes organizations successful, it's not so much about money. It's more about the attitude and the values in the organization. And when they really, meet, greet, and treat their customers and colleagues with care and respect and dignity, that's the foundation for a sustainable success in any organization and in any society.
Products are made in factories, but brands are made in the minds of people. I think it's almost impossible to create a strong brand without committed people. And a strong brand starts from within through the company culture. And what is company culture? Well, simply put, it's the way we do things around here. So it's about actions and behaviors. So culture isn't about what gets done. It's about how and why we do things. And it's about the people who do it.
As a researcher at Karolinska Institute, I focus on compassion and how to develop a compassionate mindset so we can become more authentic. So now the science has shown that that is skills that we can train. I think it's important to realize that business and society are interconnected, so the decisions that we make in business will affect our society.
The reason why I think that hostmanship has been so well appreciated by more and more organizations is twofold. The first reason is that leaders discover that hostmanship is a very effective way to create cultures where people come first. And the other reason, maybe even more important, is that people working in organizations discover that through hostmanship they become more effective in their relations with their colleagues and with their clients. So hostmanship goes two ways. It's good for the people and it's good for the business.
Hostmanship is a practical philosophy in the art of making people feel welcome. It starts with a mindset, your intentions, and then it leads into a behavior. Because hostmanship is not just some beautiful thoughts, it's words and it's actions that we do to make people feel welcome.
Okay. When I watched this movie clip for the first time and when I read a number of pages on his website, at first I thought, oh no, yet another everybody feels good management theory brought to life by some guru inspired by the age of Aquarius. But these impressions very quickly faded as I immersed myself deeper into this little book, which is full of all of kinds of highly relevant practical examples. And I'm not going to give you a list of examples here, but I can only recommend that you read the booklet for yourself. Now, to make hostmanship work in a museum or another organization, there are, of course, some conditions or factors for success that apply. Firstly, the staff must feel welcome themselves and therefore be willing and be able to be open to this approach. And this can only happen in an environment where they are in a position to help the customer or visitor in their own honest manner. Secondly, there is the commitment of the manager, who should not only provide the necessary practical opportunities, but also, and above all, the motivation and the required enthusiasm by following the principles of hostmanship himself. You can see those principles or concepts summarized here on the slide. In other words, if your organization chooses hostmanship, that cuts both ways. Both customers and employees should feel at home. This ensures an involved attitude and a feeling of pride within the organization, and customers or visitors will more readily act as your ambassadors. And exactly this is one of the most important goals of our Geneva Museum. Now, like most museums, the Geneva Museum receives visitors almost throughout the year. The museum closes 3 or 4 weeks in January, depending on the length of the Christmas holidays. And there's, of course, the traditional Monday closing, and there are also some public holidays on which the museum closes its doors. Well, the museum welcomes 45,000 visitors a year on average, and it does so with a team of 11 staff members, or 8.1 full-time equivalents. These 11 employees include 7 receptionists, or 4.3 full-time equivalents. In other words, over half the staff members. Now, this team is supplemented by 19 voluntary receptionists and about 30 museum guides who, some on a freelance basis, some on a voluntary basis, guide groups around the museum, assist with workshops and tastings, or welcome and assist school groups for educational programs. Now, what exactly does visitor reception in the Geneva Museum consist of? You might say that reception in our museum consists of 2 parts. First and foremost, there is a traditional visitor reception at reception desk. Here, the task of the receptionist consists of welcoming visitors, of course, answering their questions about the museum, and also important, about the other cultural and touristic places in Hasselt. Of course, he also has to sell entrance tickets and direct visitors to the cloakroom, to the lockers, offer them, if desired, the use of a wheelchair or museum texts in large print. And finally, he has to show them the way to start their visits. Now, at the reception desk, there's also a small museum shop where museum books, postcards, and all sorts of gadgets are for sale. The receptionists also look after this. In addition, they also answer telephone calls and refer people to the other members of the museum staff in the back office. So far, the traditional visitor reception in our museum. Secondly, and also important, all our receptionists are also involved in the exploitation of the museum's tasting room. In fact, the entrance ticket to the museum always includes a drink that may be consumed at the end of the visit in our tasting room. This tasting room is also accessible free of charge to anyone, including people who are not visiting the museum but who nevertheless fancy a drink. Here, the receptionists pour soft drinks and, of course, Genever for visitors and customers in the proper way, the perfect serve. This requires not only the necessary hospitality skills, but definitely also good practical knowledge on the different aspects of Genever, its history, its production process, its flavors, and so on. After all, our tasting room is the very place where people ask questions about everything concerning Genever, gin, and other spirits, and our receptionists are expected to be able to answer these questions, or at least refer visitors to other people, places, or sources to find the answers. For this, they get the necessary training and education on a regular basis. It's also here in our tasting room that our voluntary receptionists are working. They support the permanent staff during holidays, during busy events such as the Genever Festival in October, and in case of illness of one of the permanent staff members. They too are given the necessary instructions and training. Our museum distiller deserves a special mention. Several weeks a year, he still produces Genever and liqueur in our museum, and he does this in an authentic, restored 19th century distillery. When he's present in our museum, he is, like our receptionist, an important contact for visitors and also a very important ambassador for the museum. The museum distiller and the staff members of the back office, our secretary and our collection staff, also take frequent turns at the reception desk and in the tasting room. This happens mainly in case of illness or vacation of one of the receptionists. Now, 3 years ago, I had my first particularly present contact with Hostmanship Netherlands. Since then, the Genever Museum has completed 2 hostmanship projects, one in the first half of 2013 and one in the first half of this year. Because of the renovation of the museum's permanent exhibition in 2014, we skipped a year, but there's already a project in the pipeline for next year. Now, in that first exploratory contact, I did not know at all what to expect, but I was certainly open to everything to experiment. And I let them put forward their own proposal. Each hostmanship project consisted of a preparation stage, followed by 1 or 2 work sessions or workshops. The first part of the 2013 project was a quick scan of our museum. It started with desk research of some policy documents as the policy plan, action plans, annual reports. And this rather theoretical preparation was followed by a quick scan on site. A hostmanship employee spent a whole day with us in our museum, and this took place on a carefully chosen day on which as many museum staff members as possible were present, and on which there were a number of groups expected to visit the museum accompanied by a museum guide. The hostmanship employee hostmanship employee observed and recorded in detail all contacts between staff, visitors, museum guides, and other people. She also took the time to hold short individual discussions with them. Written communication, like promotional flyers and the text in the museum presentation, also the signposting, were also subjected to critical observation. Although all this was only to get an initial general impression, it immediately provided a number of interesting insights into the way in which customers and visitors are dealt with in our museum. The impressions and insights gained during this initial quick scan were discussed in a workshop that was held a few weeks later with the whole team present, including front office and back office, with the exception of myself. Because of obvious reasons, I was not allowed, but afterwards I received an extensive report. Now, during this workshop, also all the possible moments of contact with potential visitors were set out. From the website and the telephone to the purchase of tickets at the reception desk and the pouring of a glass of Geneva in our tasting room. And even an accidental meeting between a visitor and a staff member of the back office who's just going to get a cup of coffee. The opportunities and the pitfalls of each moment of contact were discussed in detail. The report of this workshop was an almost inexhaustive source of inspiration and a very helpful working document in the preparation of the reorganization of the visitors' reception and the museum's permanent exhibition in 2014. Another important outcome of the first project, which I definitely would like to mention here, was the development of the awareness of the back office staff. They too need to present themselves as hosts, and not just to their colleagues, but definitely also to the visitors. The most important goal of this first hostmanship project was gaining insights in its philosophy and motivating the staff to see how the museum can work following the hostmanship approach. This way, it was possible to work little by little on developing a culture and a structure in which hostmanship and its principles could grow and be implemented in such a way that they become an automatic or a natural reflex. But in order to achieve that, you need constant monitoring, constant awareness, and critical self-evaluation. During this first project, it wasn't just the museum staff that we familiarized with the principles of hostmanship. Our volunteers and museum guides also had their turn. Because this is such a big group, interactive workshops were not immediately achievable from a practical and financial point of view, so we chose to offer them an interactive inspirational lecture. And this was a very playful lecture with a lot of anecdotes to make sure that everyone got a clear idea of what hostmanship is about and of what it might mean for our organization and for themselves. Now, a follow-up is essential. So after a very busy year of renovating the museum in 2014, it was decided to take up the hostmanship story again, to dust it off and to continue with the second project. And it was noticed that, unknowingly, a lot of hostmanship ideas lingered in the heads of the staff even more than they expected. Nevertheless, during the closure period, because of the renovation, our receptionists had been able to maintain their hostmanship perspective without many problems. Since the Hasselt Tourism Office was suffering from an acute staff shortage at precisely that moment, our receptionists provided temporary cover. In addition, this was a very instructive opportunity to apply hostmanship to another environment and to another different kind of visitor. And exactly that flexibility, that too is hostmanship. Our second hostmanship project started with a mystery visit in which two completely different mystery shoppers, a man and a woman, one young, one older, and both with different backgrounds in terms of education. They analyzed and evaluated the various moments of contact. It began with consulting the revised website and a request for information via the telephone and one via email. And it ended, of course, with a visit to the museum with its completely renewed museum concept. Now, I'm not going to explain here the final report on the mystery visit, but it was worth noting that the mystery shoppers could declare that the most remarks and conclusions from the first project in 2013 had been taken into account. This mystery visit was followed by another workshop in which the report of the visit was discussed and in which there was a more detailed look at possible solutions for the remaining sticking points or bottlenecks concerning the contact with visitors and customers. During this workshop, again in the absence of myself, the staff also worked with the so-called Myers-Briggs type indicator profiles, the MBTI profiles. This is a well-known system for classifying differences in people's personalities. MBTI is a frequently used method of trying to describe, for instance, during a team building, the different personalities within a team. And based on this, the colleagues got to know each other better, they discovered each other's strengths and weaknesses, and so it would be easier for them to understand the behavior or reactions of their colleagues in a specific situation. It would also be easier to come to an agreement and a possible discussion, and it would be easier to cooperate in a general way of doing things. Of course, this exercise was done from a hostmanship perspective. Because in fact, it's not only important to make customers and visitors feel welcome and to treat them as they would like to be treated, it is at least equally important for colleagues within the team to treat each other as you would like to be treated yourself. It is obvious that a pleasant atmosphere in a team also spreads to the public. The MBTI exercise is a classic, and especially from a hostmanship point of view, I can strongly recommend it to everyone. Our team will be going into this in great depth in a third project next year. So far, I've dealt mainly with the way in which our staff members have made the hostmanship philosophy as their own. The challenge lies, of course, in internalizing a, so to speak, hostmanship reflex and in implementing it in your day-to-day professional environment and even in your private environment. Now, in order to create this hostmanship reflex in a more easy way, last year the museum decided to include investing in hostmanship as a strategic goal in its policy plan. At an operational level, that translates in commitment to lifelong learning for the staff or volunteers and museum guides, and also in maximizing the intellectual and physical accessibility of the museum. And lastly, in expanding the museum's own network, mainly by sharing the museum's own expertise in the area of the 4 basic functions of a museum: acquiring, conserving, researching, and finally communicating and exhibiting. By making hostmanship explicit in the policy plan, the museum management makes clear it also supports this philosophy and approach. Now, hostmanship is already embodied in a very concrete fashion in the Geneva Museum's baseline. Have a drink, it's educational. The inviting and therefore hospitable tone of the baseline not only invites you to come and enjoy a cozy or delicious drink, at the same time it also invites you to learn something about that drink. Because after all, first and foremost, we are a museum. The revised website was also designed as a tool that states that the Geneva Museum is a place that constantly buzzes with activity in front of the scenes and behind the scenes, and to which people are welcome to participate in one way or another. So it will not come as a surprise that one of the museum's other strategic goals is formulated as follows: every visitor counts. This means the physical visitor to our museum site and also the virtual visitors online. We have exploited this inviting and hospitable character to a great extent in our revised museum concept too. Access to the museum has, for instance, been moved from a little rather anonymous entrance to the big gates that give access to the museum's inner court and to the tasting room. This way, the inner court and the tasting room are now directly accessible, free of charge to anyone. This is, for example, very interesting to groups during a guided city tour. This free and hospitable accessibility was not the case before. Previously, only visitors who had bought entrance tickets had the opportunity to see the inner court, and at the same time, the tasting room too was only accessible to museum visitors who bought a ticket. So now the door to the museum site and the door to the tasting room are open to literally everyone, including to people who only want to have a drink. This new entrance resulted in the fact that the museum's reception had to move to another area on the museum site. For the development and implementation of the brand new reception desk or counter, a great deal of attention was paid to the input of the reception staff. After all, they are the ones who have to welcome our visitors here throughout the day in the best possible circumstances. And they did indeed have very concrete ideas about, for example, the height of the desk, the available storage, the opportunity to make direct eye contact when visitors enter the reception area, the position of the payment terminal, the lighting, etc. All these aspects were studied by our architect and designer in as much detail as possible, also taking into account, of course, the regulations of the Bureau of Accessibility, het Toegankelijkheidsbureau. No, hostmanship is not something you can implement in your work overnight. It's a work of progress, a process of constant monitoring and adjustment, a process of constantly raising awareness. And that's, for instance, why hostmanship is also included as an agenda item on a regular basis in our weekly team meetings. We also often discuss how we have tried to implement hostmanship during a past period and where we can still make adjustments and improvements for the future. It's often the small things that make the difference. The completed projects with their workshops are only making us aware. They are an extra stimulus to be a good host from a hostmanship perspective every day. So the Geneva Museum is continuing to face the challenge of hostmanship day after day. And this always happens by keeping in mind our baseline: have a drink, it's educational. Cheers. Thank you for your attention.